Since this is our first episode, we thought we'd take the time to tell you a little bit about our backgrounds and share our thoughts about the emerging vision for education in the new age. So I'll let you start, Alicia, and what's your background in education? What makes you interested in really helping other educators and other people working with young folk to develop the new age education?
Okay, well, I have actually worked with children for a really long time. I mean, for me, it started off with babysitting at around about the age
Mhm.
of 13 years old. And I just continued on from there. I have worked with all ages,
Mhm.
you know, and, with that, it led me to being a behavior technician because some point I was like, okay, well, I work with all ages, but I was interested in going towards more special needs
Okay.
direction.
Why do you
And
think that was? Sorry to interrupt, but
okay, so
first tell us what a behavior technician is, just in case people don't know.
okay, yes, a behavior technician is someone that works with challenging behaviors. Mostly, well, who I work with was children with autism.
Okay.
It's just like behaviors that interfere with the learning process for them. Like they may not be able to focus in class, or
Mhm.
even behaviors that they're exhibiting like at home with their parents that their parents is struggling with correcting. A
Yeah.
behavior technician like comes in, follows a plan, a
Okay.
behavior plan that's put in place, and it's like pretty much an everyday thing, like a routine. And
Mhm.
over time, you start to see if the behavior is changing over time,
Yeah.
with the plan. If not, then you change the plan and everything. But mostly, like I said, mostly I work with children that had autism. So
Yeah.
communication and everything was a big factor in why there were behavioral issues.
Mhm.
So, and, it was just like interesting for me
Okay.
because even though I was working with children that had autism, I saw where children that did not, the same thing techniques that was applied with them could be applied with the general population of children. So
Mhm.
I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah. And what are you doing today? What nowadays?
So currently I'm a special education teacher, high school teacher,
Mhm.
and although I don't just work with children that specifically have autism, it's, I still see a lot of the techniques that we use, that I use as a behavior technician in
Mhm.
special education as well.
Yeah.
So like the procedures, even with writing the IEP and stuff like that, it's connected.
Mhm. And your background is, what are you actually trained in doing? And talk about your side hustle as well, or side hobby.
Yeah, so I actually majored in psychology. So like I'm interested. Okay, so let's just put it this way.
Yeah.
All together, I'm interested in how the mind works, like
Mhm.
develops and works.
Mhm.
So and that's just been something like I was naturally drawn to ever
Yeah.
since I was young and observing people. So I feel like that's a natural skill set of mine, but
Mhm.
I just went deeper into it. I also am really I found myself always really being really interested in astrology.
Mhm.
So much like I studied it, and then it's like it's been a long time. For years I studied astrology, like over 15 years.
Wow.
So it's like I had a deep interest in that, but I saw the connection too
Mm.
with a lot of what I learned from astrology and just snap like people's personalities, behaviors, the connection between the two.
Mhm.
So, I felt like it was just
A
it all
natural
made
fit.
sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and my background is different. I stumbled into education the first time because when I graduated from college, I graduated a year early and I didn't want to go straight to law school, which is what I had always wanted to do and pursue. I always wanted to be a criminal defense attorney, and I knew
Mhm.
that from a very young age. So it just so happens that a new program had launched a year before I graduated from college, which was Teach for America. And so I
Mhm.
signed up to do Teach for America and was accepted into the program and ended up leaving school and going out to California, where I taught middle school in Los Angeles and hated it. And so I was like, the classroom, you'll never see me again in life. And so I'm like, I've done my time, I've given back. Let me go on and pursue the career that I'd always wanted. So I ended up, of course, going to law school, practicing, yada, yada, yada. And then I left the practice of law some years ago, but I transitioned into an organization where we actually coached and trained teachers. And so I developed a program where I trained, it was a train the trainers program where I worked the teachers all over the country
Mhm.
and helped them really develop their skill set in terms of working with kids. It was really different than what you and I are pursuing now, but it certainly put me back into the school system and in classrooms and to understanding the many things that are going on in education. So after that, I ended up several years ago mentoring a couple students at an all boys residential school in California. And for some reason, they had an opening for several teachers, and something led me to apply. And so I did. And so I ended up teaching at that school for 3 years. And now I'm here and trying to do this. So very different approach. But like you, I have always been interested in
Mhm.
developing the mind, the
Yes.
minds of other people. I think that that is definitely something that connects us. And I think the other approach is that I've always tried to understand how to connect people to their purpose in
Mhm.
life
Yeah.
and what that would mean on a grander scale if we all lived according to our purpose and that purpose connected us to a goal that we shared to better the world.
Mhm.
And so that's something that has really been driving us. And I think recognizing just, you're a Gemini, I'm an Aquarius. I think
Mhm.
we're both people who, certainly share the air sign trait, but that allows us to also appreciate the many differences that we see in people, but underneath it all to recognize what we share in common.
Mhm.
And I think that that's important too in, what we're trying to build in terms of this new education. So
Yes, I agree. It sounded good.
the way I look at this emerging education is what education needs to do is help each of us develop our highest potential, but in service to the common good or in service to the good of the whole. And what are your thoughts about that as a vision?
Yeah, I totally agree. I feel like being because me, like the way I just approach life in general, I feel
Mhm.
like whenever you have this calling or this purpose, some kind of way, even if you get off track, something keeps leading you back to where you're
Yeah,
supposed to be.
yeah,
You know, some of us fight against that a little bit harder than others, but it's an
yeah,
intuitive thing, that
yeah,
can definitely um, be something that manifests physically in
yeah.
our current lives. But I would say this that would be my vision because like I saw like or I see as being involved in the school system as a teacher, like I see the disconnect.
Mm,
It's like the students are wanting to go further, they're
mhm.
pushing the envelope, they want more.
Yeah,
They're tired of the regular or old approach and
yeah,
the it's like this one big box that everybody gets thrown in when it comes
yeah.
to education and it's leaving a disconnect because the teachers are like, okay, so what am I supposed to do now?
Mhm.
you
Yeah,
know, and so I definitely feel like the overall vision, and I would say is like bringing that connection. or
Yeah.
bringing the two opposite ends together.
Yeah. I think it'd be interesting, and I don't know this, you and I've talked about a lot of things, but I don't know that you've shared your personal experience in education when you were growing up. So I'd
Mm.
like to hear some of that. Because I think, we always, like you said, when we are in search of our purpose, we may get off track, but we're always brought back to it. And I think a lot of the reasons that people find themselves in particular fields of service is because of difficult experiences that they've had
Mhm.
in their lives. And those are often cues, not, roadblocks that stop you from pursuing what you want. But those are, if we can start to pay attention, they end up being cues that this is going to be something that matters to you later. This is going to be an area where you can actually be of service to other people. And so I know I got my stories about education, but I'd like to hear yours first.
Well, I'll tell you, my me, even just like growing up in school,
Mhm.
I just never was the type, even though I had the capabilities.
Yeah,
So my parents would tell me all the time,
yeah.
I just would not like they would lose me because
Mhm,
it's like I was one of those students that I would be in class, I would be there, but I just felt like once you start going over whatever the subject we're going over, and then it starts to become something that's like boring to me or I'm
mm,
uninterested,
mhm.
I would just start daydreaming,
Yeah,
So I just felt like, and I all like for me, I always felt like, yeah, it was good. The stuff that I was learning, it was good and all, like it was stuff that I needed
mhm.
to create like the foundation of
Right.
learning, what I need to be learning, like reading, math, and stuff like that. But I just always felt like, okay, something feels missing to me, like
Mhm.
I feel like I was going through the ropes, like I was there just because I had to be there.
Yeah.
Which is, I get it because in life there's things that we prefer to do and we don't prefer to do. But
Mhm,
which is interesting to me also because like even like how I mentioned that I was babysitting and stuff,
mhm,
the kids that I would babysit, they would be considered the quote unquote bad kids. Like
mhm,
I remember just briefly, I remember babysitting this little girl that everybody would say was bad.
mhm,
And when her mom left her with me that night and went out, and yeah, she was a handful,
mm,
okay? But when she came back, she asked how her daughter was doing, how her daughter did, and I was like, "She did good." And
mhm.
she was like, "You know what? I know you're lying." She was like, "Because," but she said, "But I'm gonna tell you, it means a lot to me that you said that she wasn't bad because I just always hear that she's
Yeah,
bad." And mind you, she was only like 2.
yeah.
So she was doing typical 2-year-old behavior. But still, what for me, I felt like there was something that I could relate to,
Mhm,
like even in school, like going through school, it was like I always had like this rebelliousness about me,
mhm.
not to where I would get in trouble and things of that nature, but just I just felt like, like okay, it should be more, and
Yeah,
it was always something missing, and it wasn't really. I Mm. It was like I was there just to learn the materials that I needed to then just
yeah,
go off to college and then try to figure out what it is that I was gonna do.
yeah,
And mind you, before I actually it took me a while to even go back to school
yeah.
because my whole thing was, okay, I wanted to kind of like be out there doing something more like an entrepreneur type,
Mhm, mhm.
um, living my free life.
Yeah,
And be more creative, but at the
yeah.
same time, I felt like that was something that school didn't really prepare me for. So I didn't have any interest there.
I was gonna ask you, but I think you just said it. I don't know if you just said that, but the question I was going to ask you is if you could articulate today what you think was missing for you then, but you just said it, the creative aspect.
Yeah.
I think that that's so important because, I mean, so many people have talked about it. Sir Ken Robinson, who passed away, I think, a year or two ago, spoke to it in several different TED talks. But I think the children today, the youth today, are starved for more creativity in terms of the educational process and not as just an add-on.
Mhm.
And I think for you, it sounds like that would have been something that really married the theory with the practical aspects of living, you know?
Yeah.
And I
Yes.
think that that's what I'm a big proponent for hands-on learning and actually doing things that have real consequences.
Mhm.
Like, I believe
Mhm.
that the learning should, excuse me, you can manage those consequences, but I believe that I've seen the students, especially working with at an all boys school, I've seen students really benefit from that and be far more engaged than
Mhm.
they typically are. I'll tell one quick story. He wasn't doing this for my class, but in the summer program, we decided to move forward with inquiry based learning. And so one of the students, this is a Catholic school, so one of the students, as boys tend to do, you want to push the envelope as far as you possibly can.
Mhm.
So he chose for his topic, um, he wanted to do a business proposal on opening a cannabis store.
Mm.
Obviously, everyone on campus flipped out, right? Everyone thought that this was just like, oh, this is never going to fly. So his teacher and I work together to really coach people through the process. It's like you may not want him to direct his life and his skills toward that, but let's let him do this because in the process of it, one, he's going to still have to meet the specifications that we have required, which is going through this inquiry based process. So you still
Mhm.
have to ask the hard questions, you still have to do the research. And this is a kid who had difficulties, who was definitely addicted to smoking, you
Mm.
know and so they're like, this is it. There are many reasons that in a traditional setting something like this wouldn't fly, but by the end of that project, he had a really good business proposal.
Oh,
He
wow.
asked the hard questions, and his life had actually transformed. I think he had re-educated himself where stopped coming to school high. Like, he actually got on
Wow.
track and graduated. I have
Mm.
no idea what he's doing today, but it's like if you allow people to go through that process, especially, I think young men who really are driven by risk, but
Mhm.
more so
Yes.
than girls. And I think that's why girls tend to do better in traditional education. But boys who are very driven by taking bad risk can
Mhm.
be retrained to take good risks within a controlled setting where you have the support. And I always had students who wanted to, write about, people who go to glorify people who sold drugs, who,
Mhm.
use weapons.
Right.
And I'm like, I allowed them to do it because it gave me an opportunity to really challenge their thinking around it. And it's like, if you can write this essay and prove your point, one person I think wanted to talk about how I can't remember who the Colombian drug lord, how he was a good person. And I was like, okay, let's do that. Now, here are the specifications because you actually have to prove this. That means you still have to be persuasive. You can't just
Right.
say, oh, he's a good person. And
Right.
it was a challenge for him, but he had turned the corner as well by the end of it. So I like tying all of these really hands on learning opportunities and giving people real outcomes to their experiences
Mhm.
because I think that's where the creativity starts to shine. It's very difficult, I think, especially the younger generation, to give them and try to convince them that they are being creative by just writing a 5 paragraph essay
Right.
or just, doing a math assignment or just building, some type of, a solar system, for
Mhm.
science class or something like that. They want to be in contact with the real world around them. And I think that's where we start to see the creativity really flourish.
Yeah.
Um, there was
And
something else you said. Go ahead.
oh, no, I agree because, my whole thing, when you talked about how even though that's what he wanted to do his presentation on,
Mhm.
there was still this format, there was still
Absolutely.
this approach that he had to take. And it's just like, well, like for me, it's
Mhm.
like, okay, I knew that at a school setting, I couldn't just be doing what I wanted. And I
Yeah,
knew there was certain guidelines to learning,
yeah,
how I would behave myself and everything. But at the same time, I felt like that was the only thing that I could do. It was
yeah,
so it lost me my interest.
yeah.
So being able to have him do okay, I know it's not okay, because really is, him wanting to run this marijuana
As
enterprise.
someone who's addicted to it,
Okay, yeah,
it's
that maybe,
problematic.
it's
Yeah,
it's problematic, but at the same time, it's out there, and then there's legal ways of doing it.
yeah, and that's
So
what he had to talk about and research.
right.
Yeah,
And so you got him to be able to learn, you know, be, as an entrepreneur or someone
yeah,
like that who's into business, understand even how to put a business together, do the
yeah,
research,
yeah,
and he was interested in doing it.
yeah,
So it wasn't like he was like, "Oh my god, I gotta go home and do this. I gotta do that. They're
yeah,
making me."
yeah,
And then that's because I know for me, that's where my rebelliousness just starts spiking
yeah,
because I'm like, "Okay, so you're gonna make me do this or that," so I feel like even if there's like a give and take, so yeah, there are some things that you would have to learn.
yeah,
Let's say we stick the solar system in there,
yeah,
but I would give you the freedom to say, okay, pick your interest in certain other
mhm,
things, and then we can go from there.
yeah,
I feel like that's even a good compromise
yeah,
versus, and then like all the students start to feel like they're involved
yeah,
versus it's just this one way.
yeah. And in doing it this way, fundamental, I talk about in the training program that I'm developing, this integration and fusion process. So when we start to make education not so much just about teaching people the historical facts that we all know we need to know, they're a good foundation, but teaching them how to become integrated people, integrated human beings, which means, you said it, instead of us pulling him, dragging him along and dragging him forward, which was not working well because he was pretty much high every day
Mm,
in a residential setting. How is he getting high? We have no idea. We
right.
speculate. But rather than having to rely on simply dragging him forward into learning,
Hmm.
it was self-initiated.
Right.
We didn't have to tell him. He did more work on this project than I had seen him do in a year and a half that I had known him. And it was because it was something he was interested in.
Hmm.
And it's like, had we cut that off, we would have probably been able to push him towards graduation, but I think he'd still be flailing, and I
Yeah.
don't know how much of it he would even retain. And so I think, this new process for us is really going to be about educating the individual so that they become self initiating and self expressing, and in the process of doing that, of course, we are nudging them towards the good rather than the
Yes.
evil or the bad. But at the same time, it's like we have to recognize where each person is. And
Hmm.
for me, it was worth him doing something that was definitely in a Catholic school environment looked down upon. Like,
Okay. Yes.
yeah, you just don't want that. But it was worth it in terms of where it led him, because I'm like, he ended up really showing up in a very different way. And I think that's what we want education to be for each and every person.
Hmm.
I'll
Yes.
say briefly my experience. I wouldn't have said creativity was missing for me in education when I was younger, because I think I'm just a person who is sort of wound up to, if this is what I got to get done, get it done. And so for me, it was like, okay, this is something that I hate. I hate school
Hmm.
and I want to be a criminal defense attorney. So I got a lot of school to get through in order to get to the goal. And so for me, whether I hate school or don't hate school, I got to get it done. And that was just the approach that I have. So it's just like I was checking off boxes, constantly checking off boxes. And I couldn't have been a person like you who took time away. I never would have gone back. And I understood that about myself, even though I took time off between college and law school. But at that point, it was pretty much settled because then I hated teaching more. So I definitely was going, to law school. And once I got through with that though, it's like I just felt I think when I was doing Teach for America, when I was teaching, the reason that I didn't like the system at that point is I was in a school where I just felt like, and these were kids who I think all of their parents had means, and not all of them, but a large proportion of the parents had means. And so that there were very high expectations for these students. Um, but I felt like at that point, the system was so very much the same as the one that I had known for myself that I didn't really believe that there was any hope in changing it. And so it was to go through this process again, to be immersed in this world again as a teacher was even more of a heavy burden because now I'm part of the problem. Now, in order to do my job, I have to, basically be on kids like do this, do that, da, 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 and it's like anytime I thought I tried to weave in more of the creativity, it was shut down. Like that's not what you're here for. And so I think I got a sort of reminder, and I was 21 at the time. So it was like, oh, yeah, nothing's changed. All right. I,
Yeah.
I've done what I needed to do. I've seen what I needed to see. Let's move on. And
Mhm.
so fast forward to recent years where I went back into teaching. I think one, because it was a non traditional school and I
Mm.
had a very supportive principal and, even other staff members, we were allowed to take risk that we wouldn't normally be allowed to take. And in part, it was because I think the kids who are most at risk tend to visibly demonstrate the greatest harm, even though the kids who are seemingly succeeding in the system are also feeling the harm. It just shows up in different ways. And so you have, I would say the high achieving kids who have anxiety and depression and, all of those things are manifesting, but they're still knocking out the good grades, they're still on track. Whereas you have the at risk kids who, you know, are not going to school, are getting involved in drugs and alcohol, are, getting incarcerated or in juvenile detention early in life. Like their issues seem to permeate more because they're doing all that and not doing well in school if they're going to school at all.
Right.
The problem is spread from the top to the bottom. I think that
Yeah.
that's become very clear. And if we really look at the things that we see in education or some of the issues in education today.
It's like because of the fact, it's just it's the should I say like the face of education, I guess, because if
Mhm.
you're, yeah, you're making the good grades, and so automatically, yep, you're on the right track
Yeah,
to succeed as an adult, succeed in life. When no, you're really suffering, like you
yeah,
said, with anxiety, depression, confusion, not
yeah,
knowing if that's what you really want to do,
yeah,
maybe even just going through the ropes as
yeah.
well. But so it's really, I mean, it's interesting that you even mentioned that because it's
Mhm.
so true.
We have these inner lives. We are physical beings, emotional beings, mental beings.
Yeah.
Everything that we say and do and how we live our lives is really determined from understanding those three aspects of ourselves.
Mhm.
Because when you start to merge those and integrate those, one, I think as human beings, we have a lot more self-control, self-mastery. So I think
Yeah.
so many people, especially young folk, when you see them in school, it's like, you know, they don't even know half the time why they do and say the things that they do and say.
That's true.
And I think a lot of our disciplinary processes really attribute more agency
Mm.
to them than what they actually have. And I take it upon us because I think if education steps into to fill that gap, I want to be able to blame kids when they do stupid stuff. I want to be able to do it. I just know from what I see because we haven't taught them how to integrate themselves. We haven't taught them how to think of how to think, then feel, then act. They just do and say whatever.
That's
And
true.
I think that when education starts to do that, then we can hold them accountable for
Right.
the things that they do and say. But right now, it's like they're all over the place because that is such a missing piece in education today. And we're just constantly focused on getting these outcomes that we want, but we haven't really given people in general, not just children, adults as
Mhm.
well, haven't given people the tools that they need to be able to direct and focus their attention so that they can get the outcomes that they want and that are, again, nudging them towards what's good for everyone, including
Mhm.
themselves. I definitely would say, at the school where I was working recently, it was in some ways very difficult because so much of I think the real work that I did was not on the list of things expected for a teacher to do.
Mhm.
And that's how you end up working twice the number of hours, and I was the one I just positioned myself to be that person when there were disagreements among kids. I'm like, we're going to talk it out. And these are conversations 45 minutes, an hour, like numerous
Right.
conversations that I'm having with students over the course of a school year because I know that what I really need from them is for them to understand that they are growing into maturity and they need to understand why this behavior is problematic, what's going on here, learn to reason for themselves so that they can choose wisely, you know? And
Yeah.
that has nothing to do with me teaching English,
Yeah.
you know? All of
Doesn't.
that is it's nothing to do with it. And so trying to blend those two worlds, like I want any educators who stumble upon our podcast and listen to know that we see you, we hear
Mhm.
you, we know
Yes.
what the struggle is.
You understand.
Yeah, that but it's so important because I knew that the main thing that I wanted for students was I didn't want to create people who would always need me to
Mm.
guide them, do this,
Right.
do that. Like, I don't like being in that position. And that meant that I had to do all of the additional work to help students stand on their own 2 feet, learn to think for themselves,
Mhm.
and be able to choose wisely. Like that was just important to me. And because I'm like, if I have to tell you something 2 or 3 times,
Right. You should. There's a problem here.
there's a problem. There's a
But that's,
problem.
you know what, even though that there's definitely a problem, a lot of them, if that's the way they have been trained
Yeah.
from what kindergarten, preschool
Yeah.
on up, they really are looking for the teacher to pretty much babysit them. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
well, when you I'm not gonna be responsible for what I really need to be responsible
Yeah.
for. Tell me to.
Yeah.
So if
And
you forget
you're
one day.
undoing that. Yeah, you're trying to rewire them, which makes our anyone who is trying to do this now and trying to move in this new direction recognize that that will be an issue because
Oh
some
yeah.
of them will, even though everything that you observe about them is saying that they want more freedom, that they want more responsibility, they will still push back on it
Mhm.
because I think that they're still fearful because like you said, from kindergarten on, and who knows, what their family dynamics are like, but everything has led them to this place where if you've been told what to do, and I was teaching high school, so if
Mhm.
you've been told what to do all of your life leading up to high school, and now to have some crazy teacher like me come along and be like, no, you are going to learn to be responsible for yourself. I'm trying to give you freedom. You need to be free and within reason, right? I'm going to guide
Yeah.
you. I'm not going to just hang you out to dry. But this, I want you to be very clear. This is what we're working toward. Um, and there was a lot of pushback, from
Mhm.
many of them, and it, I understood why. And it's like, but you can't backtrack because I'm like, I think the good excuse that we always have in working with high school students is you have you're on a clock.
Yeah.
When you graduate, your mama already said you cannot return home. And so
Don't
you
do.
need to be in a position to take care of yourself,
Yes.
not just financially, but emotionally as well. You need to be in a position where you know how to do the things that will get you to the goals that you set for yourself. And
Yep.
that's what ends up being that's education. If we
That
really
is.
step back and think about it, that's the education part. We talk about lifelong learners. That's the education that will carry you through the rest of your life.
Mhm. It's so funny too because even in the special education classroom, yeah, the tasks are a lot less tedious, but
Yeah.
well, I mean, to onlookers, but it'll be like simple stuff
Yeah.
to where I'm like, okay, when I try to with them, yes, it's important that they follow some sort of schedule, but within that schedule, I try to have them be independent as possible
Yeah.
because I'm like, okay, so after lunch, when they want to tell me, hey, Miss Isaac, like I'm done with my lunch. And I'm looking back down at what
Mhm.
I'm doing. I'm like, well, what are you supposed to do?
Yeah.
Like, and oh, okay, throw it away. Right. Like you should know what I hope for that you learn in my classroom is
Yeah.
like after you eat lunch, you go throw it away,
Yeah.
especially if it's in your capabilities. Like I'm not gonna be making them do stuff that's not in their
Yeah.
capabilities, but if you're capable of doing it, I'm gonna want to see you do it
Yeah.
because I don't need to tell you to throw away your trash.
Yeah.
So that's the type of stuff that I'm going to push them towards doing. I
Yeah.
mean, because I know they're capable of doing it. It is not,
And
well, you don't do it until I'm telling you to do it. No, I want you to go do it.
yeah.
And I want you to then go to your next activity that you work on.
Yeah.
So, but it goes to what you're saying when you're like, education is all of that. It's
Yeah.
not just, okay, well, let you learn how to write.
Right.
It's about how are you going to be able to transition into life as an
Yeah.
adult.
Yeah. And I think you said something like I actually, I want this to be our next conversation because I think a lot of people will think about, anything that we talk about in terms of forming a new education, we tend to focus on how do we help the higher achievers achieve more,
Mhm.
and we don't think about people with special needs, like your
Yes.
classroom. But when we talk about bringing out the best in every student in order to serve the needs of the whole, I
Mhm.
think you just gave a great example because you're looking at what is this person capable of doing. And so if your expectation is that they don't need to come and wait on you to tell them to throw their trash away after they've eaten lunch, the next best thing or their best highest next step is doing that on their own, of their
Mhm.
own volition. And for some people, for some children, that's enough.
Yeah.
That will be enough at this stage. And so I think it's really important, and I know you and I both agree on this and want to get the message across that we're not talking about something that is only good for the select few of
Right.
students. It's something that is going to benefit every child who comes into contact with an educator, a social worker, a
Mhm.
psychologist, whoever, guidance counselor who understands that the true role and goal of education is to get this person to their next highest step,
Yep.
whatever that is. And keeping in the back of our minds always that, by helping each person achieve their next greatest step, we're also helping the whole. We're also
Mhm.
helping lift everyone, and cultivating a desire in them to want to be better, to do better for everyone.
Yeah, no, I feel like what you said is perfect
Yeah.
as far as like our vision
Yeah.
and intention.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in and listening to the New Age Educators podcast, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.